Harriett. Baldwin, Conservative MP for West Worcestershire and Chair of the Treasury Select Committee. Next to her is Stephen Morgan, Shadow Schools Minister and Labour MP for Portsmouth South. Angela Epstein, to my right, is a journalist and broadcaster. And Paul Mason, journalist who's also the author of the book To Stop Fascism. The number to call if you'd like to put a question to our panel, 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850 and you can say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC, and you can ask your question that way, and we'd love you to watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, let's go to our first caller. It's Casey in Watford. Hello, Casey.
Hi there, Iain. Just a quick question to the panel. Obviously, if we were to send jets over to Ukraine, and, for example, NATO pushes the Russians back, wouldn't that escalate to nuclear war?
When you say NATO would push the Russians back, what do you exactly mean by that? NATO weapons, obviously planes, tanks. Imagine now, for example, you send them all in, and the Russians get pushed back, Wouldn't then Putin turn around and say, okay, take this weapon, have that. Okay. Right, let's put that to our panel. Paul Mason, as we all know, you spent some time in Ukraine near the beginning of the conflict. What do you think about today's developments and Zelensky's request?
Before I talk about the request, I want to talk about the appearance in Westminster Hall. I think it was one of the most amazing and historic events we've seen probably in my lifetime. And that's not hyperbole. I don't say that lightly. We've got a president who was absolutely pivotal in his country's resistance, standing in the spot where Charles I was put on trial for his life, Thomas More of Wolf Hall fame, put on trial for his life, quoting Churchill. And, it's two countries, both with a 1,000-year history. There are buildings as old as that in Kiev. It's an ancient society standing together. I think I feel very proud to be British seeing that. On the question, I think it's a sensible question. Okay, I think it is because Casey, I don't know how much you listen to Vladimir Putin, but I listen a lot to what he says. He keeps threatening precisely this: that if you push me out of Ukraine, I might declare nuclear war on Ukraine, and that would be, an absolute, tragedy for the world. But a combination of intelligence, which is, we have to rely on our own intelligence services and that of the Americans, and they say, look, we don't think he's serious about that, and principle. The principle is Ukraine's been invaded by what to me looks very like a totalitarian fascist regime that's raping and murdering people by design, torturing. We can't, if we stand back and allow that, what happens to the world order based on rules is every other person who wants to do this will be encouraged. So I don't know whether it's going to be British planes that end up there. One of your previous guests was talking about. They're more likely F-16, there's two a penny in the West, American F-16 planes. But it won't be NATO fighting. It will be brave Ukrainians. And there are tens of thousands, sadly, of them who've already died. So I'd like us to do the maximum we can.
But I guess Casey would argue, well, you're dancing on the head of a pin here, because they would be NATO planes. It wouldn't be NATO pilots, but we would be providing the training, we'd be providing the planes. He can easily portray that as a NATO initiative.
Well, we'd have to go out of our way to make sure that was not it. Of course, let's get one thing straight. NATO is an entity that does things. It actually owns planes. But what we're talking about here is countries that happen to be members of NATO, or not, like Finland and Sweden, giving supplies, whether it's tanks, planes, anti-aircraft missiles, so that Ukraine can, when you say drive Russia back, it's drive Russia out of a country that it has no business being in. And so we have to go out of our way to keep NATO out of this conflict. But as a Brit, as someone, a citizen of a country that is democratic, I want us to do the maximum amount. And what I'd like to see us do is be a bit more systematic about saying what we're going to supply. You can't just have this continual, right, you've given us this, would you give us a bit more? I'd like us to proactively say, look, here's a pipeline of stuff that we can give you. Meanwhile, let's crank up some factories that we have closed down or mothballed to make it again, or better stuff, because we might need it. And Casey, I'll tell you why we might need it. Because we don't want to fight a war with Vladimir Putin. But the only way of stopping people like this is to deter them, to make it clear that they will regret. There's no other way. We're dealing with a bully, we're dealing with a dictator. So you have to be able to ante up and put onto the ground in Europe forces that could stop Russia.
I'm not trying to make this a Paul Mason show.
Sorry,
No, but I want to ask you one more question.
I'm sorry.
The fact that you've been there, how much has influenced your view on this? Because I would normally expect someone from your part of the political spectrum,
the left,
to be, shall we say, slightly less aggressive in supporting what's going on here.
I think it's about the time that we're in. I opposed the Iraq War. I opposed the intervention in Afghanistan. I went to Ukraine to help the Ukrainian left who needed help. But I'm also a historian, and in the mid-30s, the left in Britain was pacifist. Large parts of our party, the Labour Party, was pacifist, signing petitions for the abolition of all air forces. Once they saw what fascism was in Spain, and in Spain was very similar, mass murder, torture, systematic sexual violence, many working class people in this country flipped and said, right, now's the time, we have to confront fascism. And I think, I didn't need any persuading, but I think there's a lot of people from a left background who did oppose the previous wars, who are saying, we can't stand by and let a European country be destroyed of 40 million people by this guy.
Okay. Harriett Baldwin, were you there in Westminster Hall this afternoon?
I was, and I find myself agreeing with a lot of what Paul had said there, and it was incredibly inspiring, and he has been such a strength for his people during this repellent invasion. And I endorse entirely this need to defend the post-war international order, and that we can't stand by and watch a country just, attack and march into a neighbour just because they want some of that territory. And we do have to stand our ground. And if standing our ground means that we have to equip the brave men and women of Ukraine with the weapons that they need, then that is what we should do to one of our truest allies.
Why haven't we been doing it up to now in terms of planes? Well,
I think that I remember from my time as a Minister for Defence Procurement that you can't just magic up pilots. Pilots take a long time to train. And that's why I very much welcome the fact that today's announcement included training for pilots, because I think training Ukrainians to fly the planes is an absolute building block for them being able to use the equipment that we might be able to provide that flies.
But Downing Street is saying, well, it'll take 3 years to train these people. It doesn't take that long. We had somebody, Air Vice Marshal on the programme an hour ago, who was saying, well, if they can fly a plane, they can be retrained to fly these planes in 3 months.
Yeah, I mean, it also depends on the type of plane. But you're absolutely right. I think training the pilots is the building block for us to be able to help them with fighter jets.
I mean, think of the film Independence Day, where the president retrained within about 3 days. So it must be possible.
Must be true.
Stephen Morgan.
I was there as well in the chamber early and was really struck, and it was quite an emotional experience, actually. Really, really powerful. And I think it was a reminder today how united the country is in standing alongside our Ukrainian friends to bring an end to this war. I share Paul's concern that it's been quite ad hoc in terms of the announcements that the government's made, and we do need a longer-term plan to bring stability, to bring economic prosperity and to end the war. Today, hopefully, was a signal to Putin that we mean business and that things are going to get worse for him rather than better. And I think we've got to make sure an investigation is underway to see what supplies we can provide to the Ukrainian people to end this war once and for all.
And on fighter jets?
So as I understand it, the request is for F-16s. We've predominantly got Typhoons and F-35Bs in this country. F-16s, I think, are the most popular form of fighter jets that we see around the world, and they work because we've got the supply chains and lots of training around the world. I think the government need to look into this and see what is possible. But, I mean, let's be clear, Labour have stood side by side with the government on this. We want to see an end to the war. We want to support Ukraine's a desperate time for their country.
Angela Epstein.
Well, Casey's question was actually, is it just too dangerous to send fighter jets? And I think we're all, I won't sort of, waste time by saying again that we're all in agreement over this. The moral principle is beyond any kind of challenge. The fact is that, as I think was it Lord Stevenson said today, that Ukraine is Britain's frontier, because that we're all part of this community, and we've got a tyrant who is threatening the sovereign integrity of Ukraine. The question is, can we do it? We've got a government who are on the kind of countdown to the next election. We're talking about 18 months. Whoever wins. But the upshot is that whatever is promised today could be unpicked tomorrow, and it's a question of how sensible this is. Obviously, we all want to help. The Russians are talking about mobilising for a spring offensive, and what they lack in sort of supplies, they have at least in numbers. They're talking about 200,000 Russians was, I think, the figure that was used today. So by sheer force of will. And I don't know how easy. I'm the least to know anything about defence, but how easy is it to mobilise fighter jets, train, as Harriett says, to train them? It's not something that's so somebody can fly a plane. And are there more sensible suggestions? Because Ukraine is in a desperate position. We're coming up to the first anniversary. There was talk of a lot of sort of massive helicopters in Poland, which is much nearer, and can you fit missiles to their helicopter fleet? This is a question of whether we're going in or out quickly. So in answer to the question, anything that we do is going to be deemed to be dangerous by Putin, because it's going to be regarded as an aggressive act. He feels he has right and history on his side, and we can't allow that kind of warped morality to stop us doing the right thing. It could be dangerous if somebody blows their nose tomorrow, because without sort of trivialising it, you're dealing with somebody who is entirely irrational. He thinks that he's fighting the Nazis when he marches into Ukraine. I don't know which history books he reads, and therefore if this is seen as an act of aggression, then it's only going to be with everything else that the West does, which opposes his kind of worldview.
Apparently, I'm misrepresenting the President on Independence Day, according to a texter here. I don't think I am, but anyway. Terry in Broxbourne wants to add to this discussion, and I think, Terry, your question, we're going to aim at Paul Mason, because I think he's probably the best one to answer you. Go ahead.
Yes, 65 years old and lived through everything. Why are all the politicians of all parties, and in particular Labour, prepared to die for another country? Because I'm not prepared to die in a nuclear war for another country. For the United Kingdom, maybe, but we're not being invaded. Why are all... It's just crazy. I can't believe I actually rung up and asking this question. It's nuts.
Okay, well, let's get Paul to answer it.
Well, Terry, thanks for ringing up. Because I was going to say before you even rang, because of the level of agreement we've got here, and indeed in Parliament, we must be aware that large numbers of people, members of the public, who are in no way, shape or form sympathetic to Putin, are worried about exactly what Terry is worried about. Because and this is why Putin does it. Putin, night after night, on the equivalence of this programme, with bigger budgets than this programme, Putin's propagandists, they don't just threaten maybe nuclear war, they show graphic illustrations of blowing up the North Sea and creating a tsunami.
Given the size of the screens behind us, we ought to be doing the same thing.
A tsunami that drowns Blackpool. So you're absolutely... I fear the guy is mad enough to do nuclear war. I do fear it, and therefore the risk we need to take the public through, the voters through, is that politicians and defence experts and the military are taking this seriously. But this is, let's put it this way, Terry. The thing is, the only security of Britain, we've got 29 ships, we've got 70,000 troops. The only security for me and you sitting here right now in the UK is the existence of what you called, Harriett, a rules-based international order. Our security doesn't depend on the British Army and Navy. It depends on a rules-based order existing. Once that breaks down, there'll be no imports into Harwich Dock 2 days later. That's how fragile the order is. So what we're defending here is not some other country's security. We are defending our own security, because I think, again, most people don't really understand how bad what Putin did is he simply said international law no longer applies. I signed a treaty in 1994 saying Ukraine should exist, and I've now unsigned it. 40 million people are doomed. That's terrifying. The Chinese haven't done it. The North Koreans haven't done it. All the other states that people don't like, Venezuela, they haven't done it. Putin has done something extremely bad that does threaten us.
Right, we'll take more questions in a moment. Terry, thank you for that. 0345 6060 973 if you want to make your voice heard and ask our panel a question. You're listening to LBC. It's 17 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
Oh, 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to ask our panel a question on Wednesday's Cross Question. With me are the Conservative MP Harriett Baldwin, Labour's Stephen Morgan, journalist and broadcaster Angela Epstein, and Paul Mason, journalist and author of the book How to Stop Fascism. Our next caller is Stephen in East Grinstead. Hello, Stephen.
Hi, good evening to you, Ian, and your guests. My question is, how will the new Conservative Party chairman skillfully handle the blue and red wall headbangers up until the next general election?
Who might you be referring to there, Stephen?
Oh, I couldn't pinpoint anybody, but I think your guests know who I'm talking about. There's quite a few people in the party that I don't agree with their views, so I'd like to know what your guests think.
Harriett Baldwin.
Well, I'm delighted that Greg Hands is party chairman. I know Greg well. I worked with him in the government whip's office for a while, and I worked with him as a Treasury minister. He's incredibly hardworking, incredibly well organised. He's a good communicator. I think he's going to be a terrific party chairman. He spoke to us tonight, and it was about we've got to unite, and I agree with him. We've got to unite. We have got about 18 months until a general election. We need to put behind us the divisions of 2022, and we need to unite and show the country that despite a pandemic, despite Putin's evil invasion of Ukraine that we were just talking about, that we are delivering on people's priorities, and that's his job, is to help us do that, and I'm delighted that he's going to be doing it.
How does the appointment of Lee Anderson as Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party help that process?
Well, I don't know Lee as well personally, but he's one of the 2019 extraordinary gains, Ashfield Conservative gain. And he's got a great story. He's formerly Labour. He is a former miner. He is someone...
He was Gloria De Piero's constituency caseworker.
He was Gloria De Piero's constituency caseworker.
How did that work?
And I mean, he is an embodiment, it seems to me, of the people that came and voted for us in 2019. And I think he'll therefore be a very good communicator to the things that will show them that the Conservatives are delivering for them, despite the challenges that I just outlined.
Stephen, I suspect you see things a little differently.
I mean, desperation, really, that we've got 30 pence Lee now deputy chair of the Conservative Party. I mean, obviously it's with regards to food bank issues and various other matters.
Yeah, because he grew up in real poverty. He grew up in real poverty. And,
he did, but I think what we've seen in this reshuffle is it was a technocratic
He knows that conservatism
reshuffle.
is the way to get out of it.
You can move the deck chairs around on the Titanic, but the Titanic's still sinking. And I think renaming departments, moving ministers makes no difference. We've got a Prime Minister who's out of touch with people's lives, and we're not seeing the action that our country so desperately needs.
Am I wrong in thinking that Labour were calling for a separate Department of Energy? Because you've now got it, and you're now saying, oh, well, it's just a technocratic thing, and there are more important things than that.
I think as a whole, if you look at what the reshuffle's done, it's not changed much at all. And I think it's probably because we've got a weak Prime Minister that isn't willing to take on the interests of his party. And actually, that's having a knock-on impact in terms of taking our country forward.
OK. Angela?
I find it astonishing that somebody whose prospective prospective Prime Minister, you're recalling Sunak Week when you think about Keir Starmer. I mean, I have no idea what he stands for.
I'm happy to send you some information about what we're doing.
Yeah, you could. I've read and I'm still no clearer. Is he going to take on the unions? Is he going to raise taxes?
This question isn't about Keir Starmer.
I know, that's true, but when you talk about Sunak being weak, I mean, he's been in office for 100 days. He took on an unenviable in tray, I would say, all the things that Harriett just said: Ukraine, war, cost of living, energy crisis, NHS, etc. I think the cabinet, speaking as a non-politician here, or somebody who's not got any political affiliations that are sort of set in stone, I would say all the general public really care about come the election is how much money they're going to have in their back pocket, and I don't think they'll care a great deal whether somebody worked up a tree or down a mine. I think it's going to be a question of whether the Conservative Party can deliver. Now, they've got an invidious task ahead because time is against them, and all of these 5 pledges that Sunak has made are going to be very difficult to fulfil given the shortness of the timescale. But it would be the same for anybody. So what do? Do you just sort of say, I am on the Titanic, or do you say, no, we keep on trying to bail out the water? And it's an awful analogy, but that's the case. And it's, I think the situation now is the Tory party are damned if they do and damned if they don't. And at least you have to celebrate and say, well, look, there are energetic moves to try and change things. The reshuffle is going to take time because civil servants are going to have to move offices. They're going to have to get off their exercise bikes and put their hobnobs down and get back into Parliament and all the other things that they need to do. And the public don't really care about that. They just want to know, have we got effective leadership?
So many of them are working from home now, they don't even have to move offices.
OK, so they have to virtually, that's a good gag, Ian, for these prices. But you know what I mean? But okay. Virtually, they have to work out who their masters are. And I think normal, ordinary people don't care. They just want to know we're going to have an effective government.
Paul Mason.
Well, the economy of this country is unfortunately stagnating. And you can see it if you walk down any high street.
Well, that's the next question.
Any town, the productivity is low. The job prospects of young people are still dire. And that's what people care about. Now, the problem Sunak has is that there are, within the Conservative Party, and I don't know where you exactly stand on this, that there are 2 ways of sorting it. And one was tried last summer. Liz Truss said, look, we slashed the size of the state, we cut taxes, and we hope that the private sector is strong enough to drive some growth through innovation and the rest of it. I'm not sympathetic to that. I am sympathetic to the idea that we need to do something drastic to kickstart growth. As a result of blowing up the public finances in the short period of time she was in office. That is no longer a possibility. So whether you're red wall, blue wall, wherever you come from in the Tory party, the thing that your ideology tells you to do, you can't do. On the Boris Johnson side, remember, Johnson was someone who just wanted to give money away. Johnson was someone who wanted to spend. I mean, Rishi Sunak, his claim to fame will go down in history that, he borrowed 3 times more than Jeremy Corbyn was promising to borrow because of COVID. So the money thing is at the root of the Tories' crisis. Either you do what Truss attempted to do, and you really attack levels of public service, and you cut taxes for rich people, or you manage the country we have in a more competent manner. I think that's Sunak's only possible get-out-of-jail card, that show a bit of competence and less chaos. But it's an unenviable position. He's been dropped in it by the 2 people who came before him, and he was, to be fair to him, saying, look, we've got to live in the real world on money. And now, it is Labour who are saying that. And I'm very happy to be in that position.
Right, I want to squeeze in a quick question before the news. It's Martin in Doncaster. He's not actually on the. Oh no, he is. No, he's not on the board at the moment. So I'm going to read out his question. Do MPs deserve a medal for their public service? Now, I don't know which one of our 2 MPs would like to explain the background to this. Would either of you like to rise to the challenge, Harriett?
I haven't followed this one. Sorry, but I think it is a huge privilege to serve, and I certainly don't need a medal.
It was a committee of the House of Commons, I think, led by Sir Charles Walker, where they're looking at what should happen to MPs when they lose their seats. And one of the suggestions is that they should all get a medal.
Absolutely not. What a waste of taxpayers' money. Let's give those medals to those on the front line that deserve them.
Harriett's nodding.
I just said, I think it's a huge privilege to be a Member of Parliament, and you certainly don't need a medal when you stop.
It's not just that. The thing is that the whole idea is that because of the uncertainty of the political life, and that you can have a job for 3 years or be out on your ear the following day if you say something regrettable or whatever it is, or the electorate determine your future, that somehow, because you can't plan, then perhaps because they were also talking about a significant payoff for MPs that lose their seats as well, that somehow you should sort of be indemnified by all that by having a nice sort of nosegay or a rosette and some money to see you on your way. Them's the breaks. If you want to go down the political life trail, then you have to accept that this is an uncertain path to follow, just as anybody who starts a new business. Paul talks about, we need to energise the economy, and businesses are the engine room of the economy, certainly new businesses. There's uncertainty in that. There's uncertainty in everything. You certainly don't need a medal, I agree, that given to the doctors and nurses and everybody else that has public service jobs.
Paul? Obviously, I think not. But I would add that there is another thing that happens to a lot of MPs, is they get honours after they've left, and they seem to get them in large numbers. And it also happens.
Not as many as they used to.
No, but I'm kind of generally against that. I think honours should go to public service. But
there is a serious point to this, because there's this phrase, there's nothing so X as an ex-MP. Now, that doesn't mean that people should get their onions out of their pockets and start crying. But if you're an MP and you lose your seat at the age of 55, it's quite difficult to find something else to do. You're not as marketable as you might think you are.
Ooh, I don't know about that.
That's happening to people every day.
I know it is, but that doesn't mean to say that they shouldn't be helped.
Well, you could say that about anybody. If anything, all these MPs that are losing their seats at 55, hopefully loads of Labour ones, will...
I thought you said you weren't political.
Well, I'm just playing to the crowd.
Mind.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely political. No, but in all seriousness, there was news only this week about the fact there's a drive to get the over 50s back into the workplace. All that experience that's accrued, and imagine, our 2 honourable members here have accrued all sorts of experiences as a consequence of
He's only been in for 20 minutes.
Okay, but even so, you've accrued all sorts of experience as a consequence of the constituencies you've served and of being part of government.
Paul,
and that could be used everywhere.
You are wanting to be an MP after the next election.
Yeah.
Does it not worry you that, depending on the seat that you get selected for, and I'm sure you'll get selected for one, if it's an ultra-marginal, and say Labour get in and it's a disaster, and then the Tories get in after that and you lose, you're on the scrap heap.
Well, those are risks that people who want to go into politics have to take. And one of the reasons we formed, I'm a Labour Party member. The Labour Party was formed by trade unions because they wanted to be represented in Parliament. One of the good things about that is that you have a movement. You're part of a movement of 480,000 people plus 2.2 million trade union members, and you can always find something. You'll find friends, I would say. And I say this not as to blow the trumpet of Labour. I think it's just a thing that I met an ex-MP last night who seemed to be doing very well, advising, democratic politicians in the developing world to win elections against dictators and corrupt people. There's always stuff like that you can do.
Look at my friend Jackie Smith, proof that there is life after politics. Right, we will come to more of your questions in a moment. It's 8:31 on LBC. Time for the news headlines with Charlotte Morgan.
Following a visit to the UK by Ukraine's president to appeal for fighter jets, Rishi Sunak says they are now part of the conversation. The UK government previously said no on maintenance and training grounds. There's growing anger in Turkey as communities say the rescue response has been too slow. Around 12,000 people there and in Syria have died since the earthquakes. An underwater search expert says he's baffled after failing to find missing mother Nicola Bulley in a river in Lancashire. Peter Faulding claims searches around the point where police think she entered the water at St Michael's on Wyre 12 days ago haven't brought any answers. LBC weather, patchy rain moving southeastwards overnight, wintry showers for northern Scotland with a low of -1.
LBC.
In the number is 0345 6060973. We have quite a lively panel tonight with Harriett Baldwin, Conservative MP, Stephen Morgan, Labour MP, Shadow Schools Minister, Angela Epstein, journalist and broadcaster, and Paul Mason, journalist, author and aspirant Labour MP. Let's go to our next question. It's an email question from John, who says, we hear stories of economic gloom every day, and yet we hear the FTSE 100 hitting record high levels. Is our economy in the doldrums or not? It is slightly confusing, isn't it, when you see the FTSE at the highest level it's been ever, and yet we're all depressed about the economy. I hate to come to you again first, Harriett, but this is kind of your moment, I guess, as chair of the Treasury Select Committee. Do you struggle with this dichotomy as well?
Well, I've got a very clear view, and we've got the Governor of the Bank of England in front of our committee tomorrow, and I actually think that inflation is the terrible problem that we have in our economy at the moment. There was so much money put into the economy during the pandemic to support households and families and businesses, and interest rates were kept very, very low. There was a lot of quantitative easing, which is basically printing money, and inflation started to pick up, and they didn't raise rates, and they kept on quantitative easing, and then pressures got even stronger. The labour market turned out to be much stronger. There were more jobs, more vacancies than anyone was expecting. And so inflation has really got out of its box in a way that we haven't seen since the 1970s. And I think the number one thing that we have to do as an economy is to get inflation back down to the Bank of England's target rate, because inflation is the worst tax you can put on anyone, particularly on the poorest.
How much is the Governor of the Bank of England to blame for this? Because they clearly didn't see it coming, or if they did, they haven't introduced the measures that you would normally do to mitigate it. Now, nobody's saying it's unique to this country. Inflation is happening all over the world, but could it have been mitigated?
It could have been, and I've just been going back over the testimony he's been giving us for the last 2 or 3 years, and the decisions that they took on interest rates. And I do think that there were telltale signs that the risks were really to the upside for inflation. And then the big turning point was when furlough ended, and I think the bank was waiting because they thought that perhaps unemployment would spike up at the end of furlough. But actually what their network of agents was telling them was that the labour market was very tight, and they should have moved earlier at that point to start raising interest rates. And I'm afraid, inflation was already running at sort of 5-6% before the invasion happened. And then, of course, you saw the spike in energy prices, and it's really become embedded now in what the Bank of England would call second-order effects. You know, it's not just the first wave of inflation now. So I think it's going to be more painful than we were expecting in terms of interest rate hikes to get inflation back down to its target again. And that's the backdrop whereby, we have great businesses in this country. The private sector has shown incredible productivity, incredible resilience, incredible strength, incredible ability to create jobs throughout these challenges that they've had to face. And yet the forecast is for not great growth because we're basically experiencing these inflationary pressures. And that's my 2-minute summary for you, Iain.
Well, it's really interesting because we had the IMF forecast last week. The Bank of England is roughly in line with that. Although NERA this morning, an economic think tank, they're being a little bit more optimistic and saying there will be growth in 2023. Are you going to test him on whether he stands by his forecast that inflation will return to 2-3% by the end of 2024? Because it seems a long way to drop in a comparatively short time.
Yeah, I certainly am. And, it worries me. One of the government's own objectives now is just to halve inflation. Now, inflation's 10% at the moment, and that would only take it to 5%. And I think it really needs to get back down to the sustainable target of 2%, because otherwise it's going to get inflation is going to get much more embedded in people's wages, in people's wage expectations. And it's the poorest that pay the most price when inflation gets out of control. You see food prices are up 16-17% over a year ago. This is the hardest on people on the lowest budgets, and we've really got to get inflation down, and I'll definitely be asking him questions about that.
Final question. It reflects a question we had, I think it was yesterday, from somebody who was complaining that savings interest rates are not being put up by the banks. I mean, I'd love your committee to do an inquiry.
We did. We had all 4 chief executives of the big banks in yesterday. I mean, we had a panel that was probably paid over £10 million a year, and we certainly did. And you know what? When we invited them in, all of a sudden, we suddenly saw them raise savings rates much more quickly the minute we invited them in. So I said to them yesterday, I said, do we have to invite you in every time we want you to increase your savings
appalling,
rates?
Isn't it? Because there was always, and Paul, you'll remember this expectation that if interest rates went up, so savings rates would go up. That was the case certainly in the 80s and 90s, and yet it doesn't seem to automatically follow now.
How strange that economics turns out not to be run like a Meccano's. It's more like a complex 3D chess game.
I mean, going back to this question, I mean, you were economics editor at Newsnight for some time, so you'll have an interesting perspective on this. I mean, is the economy in the doldrums or not?
We're in the middle of an 18-month recession, and
we're not, though, are we?
Well, that's what the prediction is, and we are. It's going to get worse because what you're saying, inflation, how much people's spending power. This indeed, I'll come to the Bank of England. This indeed is why the governor, the case for what he did was to say, in the end, the inflation is externally driven by energy prices and by food prices and by everybody else coming out of COVID at the same time. I don't need what I can do domestically isn't going to do what you think it will do. Eventually it will run out of its own steam. But I will say this: if you're grilling the governor tomorrow, the way it was put to me by an ex-member of the MPC Monetary Policy Committee is this: the Treasury sets the homework. The Bank of England does the homework, the Treasury marks the homework. That's how central banking works. Rishi Sunak set the Bank of England's remit throughout the entire period we're talking about, and he could have just said, you're not meeting it. In a letter, he could have said in one line, please do something else. Please improve your performance. And yet, if you look at the letters between Sunak and the governor all the way through, what you'll find is that issue was never properly broached. So the government ultimately sets the remit of the Bank of England. If it doesn't think the symmetrical 2% target is being met and it needs more action, he can write to him. So, look, I think we were always going to be hitting a problem. And to answer the question, why is the FTSE high? Why is gold simultaneously, gold, FTSE and bond prices all high? Because a lot of investors think this is that we're actually we've been through the worst of the kind of harsh measures of what policymakers are doing, both governments and central banks, and that therefore you need to buy assets like equities now. It doesn't reflect what's going on in the high street. It doesn't reflect what's going on in people's wages at all. And it is puzzling to people, but that's the only explanation. Investors think 18 months ahead, and they price assets at least 18 months in advance. They're betting on the upturn that will come because the worst of inflation is probably over.
I'm going to ask our other two panelists to be relatively brief because we want to squeeze some more questions.
What he said.
Angela.
He's the colossus of the economic world. I mean,
you agree with Paul Mason? That is true.
I'm very fond of Paul Mason. All I would say is that it's all about the optics as well. We have a country that is being brought to its knees at the moment because of strike action across all different public sectors, some of whom are asking for absolute inflation-busting pay rises, and if the government is going to find that money, is going to bake inflation further into the system. And I think for your ordinary person who can't get on a train, who can't get a hospital appointment, who whatever, and is thinking this is only going to make matters worse in terms of rising prices, then it does look very gloomy indeed.
Stephen.
I agree with lots of what Harriett said. I know she does a good job as the chair of the Select Committee working with MPs from across the House. The consequences of this are on daily people's lives. And, look at the fact that energy bills will probably go up by 40% in 8 weeks' time. The government have not delivered a proper windfall tax. Look at the fact that if I go into a school, I meet children that are turning up to school with clothes that are damp because they can't afford to heat their home or tumble dry their clothes. This is modern Britain. And why aren't we doing much more in terms of improving the well-being of our citizens? Why aren't we doing more to ensure a growth strategy for our country? Why aren't we taxing Shell and BP on those obscene profits that they've made, have a proper windfall tax that actually supports working people right now.
You do realise that their profits are worldwide, not just in this country.
They do, but certainly on our windfall tax, it would have generated an extra 13 billion, which would have gone into the pockets of working people.
How does that work? Because BP's profits, I think, what were they, 32 billion, around 2 billion of that was made in this country. So how do you get to 13 billion extra windfall
So
tax?
we would have backdated the windfall tax to January of last year, and it had a similar rate as Norway has, and that would make a significance different. And of course, the reality is that in 8 weeks' time, they're getting up to about £3,000 again.
There's been £37 billion of support, particularly for low-income families, over this winter. So I am very proud of the fact that we have really helped a lot of every household, and we will continue to help those on the lowest incomes.
Right, we'll move on to another subject in just a moment. You're listening to Cross Question on LBC. It's 8:46.
LBC.
Baldwin, Stephen Morgan, Angela Epstein and Paul Mason with us taking your calls and texts. Sarah is in Hounslow. Hello, Sarah.
Hello. I had a question for the panel, which is, why is the Church of England still refusing to accept that gay marriage exists, to the extent that when gay clergy marry, they are stripped of their right to officiate?
Well, of course, the General Synod of the Church of England has been considering whether to allow blessings of gay marriages in the Church of England. They apparently haven't reached a conclusion, which is very annoying for me because we're going to be doing a phone-in on this at 9. But there we go. They're going to continue their discussions tomorrow. Stephen Morgan.
I grew up in the Church of England. I was a chorister till I was 18. I can sing later if you want, Ian.
Feel free to do it now.
Well, I'll take some requests. I mean, this is a sensitive issue. I've heard from my constituents about this issue, and that's why I've written to the Bishop of Portsmouth. I think that it should be allowed in the Church of England. It's already happening in the Church in Wales and with sister churches in Scotland. I think it's the right thing to do. The Church should show compassion and love for all of its worshippers.
But the traditional view of marriage is that it is between a man and a woman, and there would be people who are devoutly religious who just cannot accept that the world has changed, and they will quote the Bible and won't accept any argument against other bits of the Bible that you can quote against them. And I mean, this could lead to a split in the Anglican Church, couldn't it?
The world has changed. The Church of England needs to change, I think, to survive. Obviously, it was created by Parliament, and there are mechanisms in Parliament for it to bring about change. I'd rather they're not used, and that's really important why the General Synod continues to have discussions and hopefully finds a consensus. But that's certainly something that I've been pushing for as an MP that's been born and bred in the Church of England.
Well, let's hope that we have a little bit of time at the end of the programme for a rendition of Ave Maria. Angela.
Well, look, the position of the Church of England is that marriage exists between men and women. It is supremely sensitive. I'm not a member of the Church of England, and I wouldn't presume to suggest sort of the ways things should be done, because it's not my particular religion. But I would say, in a broader sense, there has to be an element of respect too. Because yes, the world is changing. I think the Church of England has said that it will bless civil partnerships, but marriage exists in the eyes of the church as a union between a man and a woman. And it's a bit like saying, I don't wish to sound disrespectful, I'm just sort of groping around for a very simple analogy. You play for Manchester United, you have to wear red. You can't say, well, there are lots of other colours too. Those are the rules of the game in terms of the Church of England. And I think what's happening with a lot of modern religion is, of course, we have to be compassionate to all souls. But just like the argument that broke the other day about we have to now say, is God gender neutral? Is he a man or is he a woman?
We don't have to say that at all.
But that was the argument being fielded. But what's happening is that we are using up all our energy on these kind of discussions when we're losing sight of what religion can bring to people's lives.
But there are many gay people who are members of the Church of England who feel just as passionate about their religion as straight people do. And why should my marriage to a man affect your marriage to a man? I think that's what people don't quite get. How does it undermine straight marriage?
I understand. I absolutely understand that. But that people have chosen to join a religion or a religious organisation with certain rules and beliefs, and I think they have to be respect. I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong that somebody should be able to get married in church, whether it's a gay marriage or it's a heterosexual couple. What I'm saying is that certainly in terms of minorities as well, it seems to be we've reached a position now in discussions that because the minority version is vocal, very vocal, there are often stampedes over the large number of traditionalists who'll say, but this is how things have been done, and this is how we want you to respect things have been done. There are other ways for you to bless your union and have it respected and have it celebrated, but not in this way. I appreciate it's a real minefield, but I do appreciate the traditionalist view as well.
Paul, then Harriett, very briefly, if you can.
I was brought up a Catholic. I'm no longer a Catholic, but I learned a lot from Catholicism. And I think I would to people who feel that like you describe, and I meet many of them often elderly people. The point, there is one theological point that I think from my Catholic upbringing, which was pretty rigorous, I would make. The first thing you learn is that God loves everybody, and that in the Christian religion, of course, there are other religions. In the Christian religion, it is said that Jesus died to exculpate the sins of the whole of humanity, including everybody in the future. We now live in a society where getting married as gay people is normal, and it's accepted, hopefully, and it's something that we accept and celebrate. And I would just put that to the great thinkers of the Christian religions in Britain. How does this... How does this kind of rearguard action that you're fighting, when you've already got gay clergy and the rest of it, how does it fit with that fundamental of, and it's not just the Christian belief, it is actually common to all the Abrahamic religions. How does that fit with that? Because like you say, Ian, there are many, many devout gay people in all of those religions, and how does it fit to say to them, you can't?
You'll know better than I do, but I don't think the Catholic Church would exist without gay priests, would it? He says flippantly. Harriett?
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter for the General Synod to decide, and I hope they do decide to allow it. And I also hope they change, the fact that Jim and I, when we got married, we'd both been married before, and the Church of England refused to marry us. So we got married in the Church of Scotland instead. And that sent a very sort of strong signal to us that we were really wanted in the Church of England at the time. So I think that, these things do need to evolve and reflect the way society evolves. So I hope the General Synod make that decision.
Right, let's go to a text question from Jeannie in Scarborough. James Norton from Happy Valley says the government is wrong to make kids continue studying maths till they reach the age of 18, saying the arts will be ignored too much. Is he right? Now, James Norton, if you watch Happy Valley, you know he played the villain Tommy Lee Roy. Oh, am I not allowed to mention
No
Happy
spoilers,
Valley?
I'm halfway through.
Apparently it's very good.
La, la, la.
Okay.
Have you got to the bit where he finds out he's Jewish?
I haven't watched any of it.
We always say that.
Paul Mason.
I do think we need to improve the numeracy of everybody. The future is digital. The future, you've got to be numerate. And I would like to see that 16 to 18 period, people get access to the STEM subjects that then, if they're like me, I did music and art and English lit at that age. I probably should have done a bit of maths. But here's the problem. You try finding a maths teacher already. More importantly, for the future scientists, we need a lot more access to further maths. Further maths is critical to getting into physics, into computation, into engineering, and there's not enough access to further maths. So I think let's do it. Let's do it through what works. Let's just find out what works and not make it an ideological thing.
Oh, and he also said that he wants to make the arts more accessible. If you make kids study maths until the age of 18, that's got to be at the expense of something else. And he said this to our Newsagents podcast, which you can, of course, listen to on Global Player.
And can I just say on this that it shouldn't be either or. I mean, I was a linguist at school, but I did a lot of drama, and then I decided I needed to know maths, and so I'd left school, I'd left university, I actually taught myself maths, and I got into finance.
And now you're head of the Treasury Select Committee.
Yeah, I know. Let's talk out for lifelong learning, because it doesn't all stop when you're 18.
Steve.
I mean, I want a curriculum.
Shadow Schools Minister.
I want a curriculum that's broad and varied, that encourages curiosity and creativity. We want young people to leave school ready for work and ready for life. The issue with the maths pledge that the Prime Minister has rehashed and re-announced recently is, as Paul says, we can't get the maths teachers. 40% of people are leaving the profession in 3 or 4 years. It's a real challenge to deliver that.
Myself,
You taught yourself, but I'm afraid we can't clone you.
No,
so that's the challenge. So we want to make sure that people are ready for
very quickly.
I'll just tell you, I was a scholarship girl to a posh girls' school, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to go. And my maths teacher and I couldn't do maths. She wasn't very fond of me because I couldn't do maths. I had to do it through a book to get through my then O-level, to call it in old money. I think if by the time, and maths and I had a very nasty divorce, by the age of 16, we both agreed we could not live together.
Me too.
Bye-bye maths. And I think if you haven't nailed it by 16, the idea of 16 to 18 being some kind of critical period in that is a nonsense. I think you need to be able to hammer down numeracy much earlier in the stage.
Right, final text question from Alice in Cardiff. The Speaker talked about having given President Zelensky some chorley cakes, or is it chorley, with tea, because that's where Lindsay Hoyle comes from. But what baked goods would you have given to the Ukrainian president? Angela?
Without question, because he is of Jewish heritage, I'm Jewish, and we have something which is like a fruit bread called Kuchen, and he would probably have...
It's cake in German.
So there you go. I never knew that. Okay, so much for me for parading my Jewish credentials.
On this
I have. So I would say, because it's a bread, but it has sort of raisins in, so it's sort of slightly sweet, but you have the satisfaction of bread. So I think from a symbolic perspective, because of his heritage,
Paul?
would have been worth...
The new British food religion, the pastel de nata. The Portuguese custard tart.
Ooh.
Yeah. Oh, you've got...
You're a posh northerner.
You live in London.
You
have had one.
No, I haven't. Seriously.
Call yourself a northerner.
I'm a Worcestershire MP, and so when I go around the world, people have heard of Worcester sauce. Yeah, it absolutely puts us on the map. So I do sort of Welsh rabbit, I think, with some Worcester sauce. Yeah.
All right, Stephen.
I'd invite the President down to Portsmouth, heart and home to the Royal Navy, and he has to try a cinnamon bun from Bread Addiction, the best in the country.
I'm keen on cinnamon buns. Thank you very much indeed, Stephen, Harriett, Angela and Paul. If you missed any of tonight's programme, you can catch up on the Cross Question podcast. Coming up in the next hour, we are going to talk about the fact that the Archbishop of Canterbury has warned MPs that he will ignore threats of parliamentary intervention to force the Church of England to allow same-sex couples to marry in church. I wonder what your reaction to that is, because if marriage is such a great institution, why shouldn't gay couples avail themselves to it as well and be married in a church? 0345 6060 973. And I feel as if I'm going to quote not the 9 o'clock news here, but are you a gay Christian? Because if you are, I want to hear your views on this. Paul is laughing because he gets the analogy that I was making there. Everybody else is looking a bit blank. Maybe we'll find the clip and play it just after the 9 o'clock news here on LBC.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.